Hey Kev, the client needs that document ASAP.
I'm trying, but the internet is so slow. And now it isn't working at all.
Is your internet provider holding your business back? Switch to one who keeps you moving forward. At Cox Business, we know how crucial connectivity is to your business. That's why we give you the peace of mind of around-the-clock network monitoring and 24/7 support. So if your provider isn't setting your business up for success, make the switch to Cox Business today. Get 50 megs of internet for only $90 per month with a 1-year agreement. Ends 4/30/20. Restrictions apply. Visit coxbusiness.com for details.
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
All right, yeah, our roster looks great on paper. Whoop the hell. All right. But at the end of the day, we better be a good team. And you start building that during this time of the year.
Get your sorry ass up! Get your sorry ass up!
Doing a lot of talking with somebody that ain't do shit today. Doing a lot of talking.
Do you think you're better than Jarrell Revis is right now?
I'm better than you. My 24 years of life, I'm better at life than you.
James! Time to go to work!
I ain't 36. I ain't never seen you before, huh? Better go tell the coach you need some help. We gonna expose you, boy. All right, we coming at your ass.
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast, proud members of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. You can find them at FTFPodNet on Twitter. You can find me, your host, Matthew Burning, at SportsFanaticMB on Twitter. We are just one of a ton of great podcasts associated with this network, though, some of which are Jim Day of FF Champs, Corey Parsons and Dr. Roto from SiriusXM Radio, Mr. Bob Lung from the award-winning Fantasy Football Consistency Guide and the creator of the Midwest Fantasy Expo, Dwayne McFarland, Blake Sullivan, and a ton of great others, and you can find all of us on FullTimeFantasy.com, your one-stop shop for all of your fantasy news, advice, and strategies. We at the Roundtable are also excited to be partnering with ExpandTheBoxScore.com. You can find them at XTBoxScore on Twitter. They have some of the most advanced stats in football, baseball, basketball, and college football. College football stats are extremely hard to find. For just $15 a year, you can look at all of these. I'm telling you guys, it is well worth it. If you like to dive into the analytical side of sports I use it for prospects, college football prospects specifically, it is amazing. It goes down to the minutest of details in this stuff. And again, it's just $15 a year. If you use our code ROUNDTABLE, you will get 10% off of that, which is a steal of a deal, if I do say so myself, and probably the best deal in the industry. So definitely check them out, especially if you want to get a jump on the upcoming draft class. It'll be well worth your time and money. It's Thursday, and we usually have three of us here today. Me, Mr. Matthew Fox, who you can find on Twitter at Nighthawk7734, and Tony Dyer, who you can find on Twitter at Commissioner MR. Tony has some stuff going on with his podcast, Huddle Up. Check that out. It is an awesome podcast about mostly about the NFL. Does a great job with it. He had some prior commitments come up with that, so he is handling that. So it's just Matthew Fox with me today. We are going to talk about the NFL honors on Saturday, and of course, the best day in football, or the best event in football, in the Super Bowl. Super Bowl Sunday between the Kansas City Chiefs and my goodness, I blanked for a minute, and I don't know why. San Francisco 49ers. Jeez, that was horrible. What a great way to start the open of this episode up, right, guys? Yeah. San Francisco 49ers and Kansas City Chiefs. Super Bowl in Miami. Cannot wait. Should be what I'm hoping and I think is going to be a really good game. So let's get Matt on here so we can talk about the NFL honors and the Super Bowl. And it is Thursday of Super Bowl week. We've got Mr. Matthew Fox with us, as we were just mentioning there in the intro. Matt, how has your week been so far with everything going on?
Well, it's been no week at Disneyland, so, adjusting back to work. But excited to have a meaningful football game this weekend. I don't really count the Pro Bowl as a meaningful game. I almost forgot that it happened last week, so it's nice to have one more good game left. And curious to see who's going to make the Hall of Fame list. Really pulling for Steve Atwater.
Yeah, I'm actually really interested to see that as well. We'll get that announced on On Saturday, as I mentioned in the intro as well, we'll be discussing the NFL honors. We're going to do that first, actually. I figured we might as well get that out of the way, talk about the NFL honor stuff, and then jump into the Super Bowl, as that's kind of the more important thing in a way. So we'll discuss the Super Bowl here second. So let's go ahead and just jump right in and talk about the NFL honors.
First and 10 at the Lions 29, and Prescott goes screen right. Elliott down the right side to the 25, to the 20, to the 10. Elliott to the pylon. Zeke Elliott, touchdown. 38 on the screen.
Second down at 10, takes the snap, gives it. Chubb runs, he's to the 15, he's to the 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. There goes Chubb, he's to the 30, 20, 10, 5, touchdown, Chubba Lubba Hub. 92 yards.
Marshawn Lattimore, 12 yards from Adam. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side, caught by Diggs. Stay up! Oh my God! 30, no! 10! Touchdown! Are you kidding me? It's a Minneapolis miracle! Stephon Diggs and the Minnesota Vikings have walked up on the New Orleans Saints. It's a 61-yard Minneapolis miracle.
A lot of interesting awards going on this weekend. The only one I think that is really kind of sewn up is the MVP, which I would imagine you are in an agreement here that Lamar Jackson is going to be the MVP of the NFL this year.
Yeah, I think it would really be impossible to go with somebody else just because what Jackson did as a passer and as a runner we haven't seen before. And the Ravens were such a great regular season team. And these awards, we have to remember, they vote on, you're supposed to be voting on regular season performance. I think that's actually when they vote. So, kind of disregarding what happened in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I know there was a lot of talk earlier in the year about like Russell Wilson. I know Rodgers was kind of in the discussion for a while as well. I don't see how anyone can take it. Lamar, regardless of what happened in the playoffs, had a phenomenal year. So even if they did kind of keep in count what happened in the playoffs, I still don't think anybody left. Maybe Patrick Mahomes, but even he had kind of it's not fair to say a down year. I mean, dude, like, dislocated his kneecap and is also kind of very hard to live up to what he did in his first full season in the NFL. But Lamar Jackson just all around had a better year. So even though Patrick Mahomes has made it to the Super Bowl, I think he'd probably be the only one out of both teams that would have a chance to be in the discussion. I still think it would go to Lamar Jackson. So that one's kind of the easy one for us. I'm interested to see where the rest of these go. We don't, I'm looking at your list now. We actually don't disagree on many. But I'll let you kick it off first on your pick for the offensive player of the year.
I went with Christian McCaffrey. He probably would have been, for a long time, he was a close second probably in the MVP balloting, but with Carolina kind of falling off, it became harder to make, and Lamar Jackson was so good. He kind of fell out of there. But I think what he did, as both a runner and a receiver. I've seen a lot of people making a case that it's going to be Michael Thomas. Mm-hmm. That was kind of interesting to me. He had an incredible season, obviously, as well. But for me, I just think McCaffrey was the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah. Those were the two that I was torn on. To me, I don't think there's really anybody else in the discussion. It is between those two. And the reason I went McCaffrey as well is because I don't know. See, I'm even still waffling. Like, it's been so hard because my argument, I guess, for McCaffrey would be that I believe now he's the third player in NFL history to go 1,000 and 1,000. 1,000 receiving yards, 1,000 rushing yards, which is incredible. But then you go and look at what Michael Thomas did, and now technically he's the only one to have as many receptions in a season as any other wide receiver, obviously with beating out Marvin Harrison's record. And he was a key reason why the Saints got into the playoffs as well. It was, as much as I love Christian McCaffrey, and we've talked about it all season long, that he should have had the Panthers made it into the playoffs, I think he would have been right there with Lamar on the MVP discussions, but because they fell off, he kind of fell out of that. So I'm actually going to go with Michael Thomas. I'm going to change my pick here. Because the Saints were able to do it, and while you could make the argument for both here and that they both were playing with backup quarterbacks for a while. Michael Thomas still put up great numbers with Teddy Bridgewater, and granted Teddy Bridgewater is better than Kyle Allen, but Christian McCaffrey didn't always need Kyle Allen's help to do some of the things he did. I mean, technically he has to get the ball handed off to him, but a lot of the other stuff he was doing on his own. He's a phenomenal running back. So I'm going to give it to Michael Thomas just based on him breaking that NFL record of most receptions in a season, taking that away from Marvin Harrison, and helping get the Saints to the playoffs. So I imagine it's going to come down to one of those two. If I had to pick, I think McCaffrey's probably going to win it, just based on the season he had, but I would lean Michael Thomas for me. Defense.
Yeah, it was interesting to me. I was looking at the poll of the experts on NFL.com, and they actually had Michael Thomas winning by a narrow margin. So you may be right. I mean, they're both phenomenal seasons, so I don't think you could go wrong with either of those guys.
Yeah, that's like the worst part about it, right? Is that both of them had such good seasons. It kind of sucks that it has to be given to one of them now. Like, even if they split it, and it was like an AFC Offensive Player of the Year, and NFC, they're both in the NFC, so one of them, regardless, would have had to have lost it. So it does suck that they both kind of did this. And really, go back to discussions we've kind of had all season again, going back to Christian McCaffrey, it really kind of sucks that this happened for McCaffrey in such a down year for the Panthers as well, because we know the shelf lives for running backs is so short that you kind of feel like McCaffrey wasted such a great season all in all on a really bad Panthers team. So now I kind of feel like maybe you give it to him to kind of offset. It's a weird thing, man. Like, I would be happy if either one won it. I do think... I'll ask you this before we move on. Who do you think has a better chance to repeat what they did? Maybe not 1,000, and obviously breaking the reception record, because that's just ridiculous. But who do you think has a better chance to be in this discussion again next season?
I think probably Michael Thomas, because we've seen, obviously the big question was, without a strong complementary receiver, could he still do this? And, is a lot of his success going to be dependent on Breeze? And I think he answered both those questions. And we've just seen, too, running backs that have the amount of touches that McCaffrey had are so much more prone to an injury or a breakdown.
Yeah.
And it's a position that ebbs down over time. We also know McCaffrey is going into a new offensive system with a brand new coach and everything. You don't know exactly, will his usage be similar? If Carolina had a better passing game to its receivers and tight end, would he have dominated? We've seen incredible seasons from running backs once. Think about David Johnson 3 years ago was doing the same thing, and he's never gotten back since. But you see receivers, not always, Antonio Brown, before his mind broke, had many years where he was, you could dial him in. Julio Jones has had explosive seasons year after year. Marvin Harrison, who used to have that record, had several explosive seasons year after year. I just think at receiver, the longevity and the likelihood of sustainability is a little bit higher.
Yeah, that would be my thing too. And the fact that you brought up DJ scares me even more. Again, just going back to the point I was just trying to make, that it almost in a wasted year for Christian McCaffrey. Like, could you just imagine how... Yeah. I don't want to say sad, but just like how deflating that's going to be if in a couple seasons. I don't think it'll happen, so please don't take it. Anybody who's listening to this, don't take it this way. I'm not trying to say I think Christian McCaffrey is going to be the next David Johnson, but if something like that were to happen, where just the workload on him and some couple injuries and the legs kind of start piling up on him, if he could end up in a situation like DJ and just kind of, and really a wasted year, really does kind of suck.
And he's not the only one. I mean, we've seen that happen to Le'Veon Bell after he led the league in touches. We saw it happen to several guys. And I think David Johnson, his great year also came during a time when the Cardinals weren't really a contender, which was, like, oh, well, if they can get better in these areas and you have David Johnson doing this. So, it's just going to be interesting to see, because that was one of the question/knocks on Christian McCaffrey was, could he be that 3 down, all facets, continually take that kind of pounding, because he's not a huge guy.
No, not at all. Yeah, it's crazy to think that, because I do remember, this is, I go back and I like to say it was a good call. This was really before, obviously, I really started getting into this industry. I think at this point, when they came out, I was riding with you in FLA, but I was just doing Cleveland Brown stuff. Like, I hadn't even moved to any kind of fantasy stuff. But even in my fantasy drafts and everything, I was always telling people to take Christian McCaffrey, because I was more worried about Fournette and the ankle issues. Now, that in a way obviously played itself out correctly with what McCaffrey's done his whole career. Fournette's really kind of come on this year, but that was the narrative of him back then, was, he's a smaller back. Can he really take the pounding? And I remember him getting paired with CJ Anderson, Jonathan Stewart. Like, it's crazy to think how good he has been, and how, I don't want to say people doubted him, because he was still the 1-2 in most rookie drafts, I would think. I don't remember anybody else getting drafted over him outside of Fournette. So, but it is crazy to see how he's kind of dispelled that. Now nobody thinks that. Nobody looks at him as like, oh, he can't handle the workload, because of what he's done since he's gotten into the league. All right, let's see. Defensive Player of the Year. This is one I know that we differ on, and I meant to read these earlier, so I guess I can, never too late to start. These are some of the top the vote getters or points, however. I'm looking on NFL.com's thing here. So you got Stephon Gilmore, TJ Watt, Nick Bosa, Aaron Donald, Chandler Jones, Minka Fitzpatrick, and then a couple other guys tied at 7th. So who did you go with, and then I'll give you mine.
I was tempted to do Minka Fitzpatrick, because he had a big impact, I think, on the Steelers. But I ended up going with Stephon Gilmore, because I think this season the Patriots defense was really carried that team. I mean, the first half of the season there was no unit that was I called them first half of the season fantasy football MVP, just because of what they were doing, smothering other people, especially in the passing game. And I think the marquee player from that unit this year was Stephon Gilmore. To me, Defensive Player of the Year was a little bit harder, because there were a lot of people that had good seasons and had good stretches, but I didn't feel like there was a consensus 1 or 2 dominating players.
Yeah, so for me, I'm going to kind of talk out of both sides of my mouth here. As I talked about earlier, the playoff stuff doesn't matter, but for me, in a way, it did here. I ended up going Tre'Davious White. There was a battle between him and Gilmore a lot of the season on who was the better cornerback and who could end up winning Defensive Player of the Year. I know Gilmore had a couple more interceptions. I think he had one more touchdown. I think it may have been Miami or the week before. He ended up getting, I think, either 2 pick sixes or a pick six, and then Tre'Davious White almost returned one that week, but didn't. So Gilmore does have a couple more touchdowns than him. But what Tre'Davious White, I think, did in the playoffs for me kind of changed my opinion. I know that my goodness, why am I'm blanking here. The Titans didn't do much against Gilmore.
I do have to ask you, don't they do the official votes right after the regular season, so they don't get to see
they do.
Playoffs, right?
No, yeah. I'm not saying that. I'm just going mine. I don't think White's going to win.
I was wondering.
Yeah, I was going to say, it would have been Gilmore for me. Why I changed my vote was because of what he did in that Texans game. Now, yes, in the second half, Hopkins did start to get the better of him on a couple plays, but the way he completely shut out Hopkins in that first half, to me, kind of spoke volumes. I know Gilmore pretty much did the same thing all year as well, but he gave up a couple more big plays toward the end, and part of me is more of like, I kind of want to give it to that guy, because it's a phenomenal year, and Gilmore, I know he had a phenomenal year as well. I don't think there's a wrong answer, really. I do think Gilmore's probably going to be the one who wins it. Although I do think Nick Bosa's kind of in the discussion, but I think he's going to win an award later we're going to get to, so I think that's why they won't give him 2. For me, those are the top 3 that I would vote for. I did like the Minka Fitzpatrick call that you made. probably would have put him up there had they made the playoffs. Like, I feel he was so
middle
good.
of the season, he was the defensive guy, but I feel like down the stretch, you didn't hear
he didn't do as much,
from him. He didn't do as much, and that's the tough thing. This was, to me, it felt like a little bit of a year where, like McCaffrey and Michael Thomas were balling out every week the entire season. I mean, they were pretty consistent with everything. Defensively, we've had years where people were really dominant throughout the season. It was hard for me. I was looking at, some guys who were potentially in contention, and you could make a case for 3 or 4 guys.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's why I feel like, for me, my top 2 were Gilmore and White, because I do feel like even there was like a week here and there that they struggled, but even going into like week 16 and 17, everybody was talking about their battle really for this award because of how well they were both playing. Neither one of them really kind of slowed down throughout the year, where you are right. Minka, especially when they first made that trade of him coming over to Pittsburgh, I think he had like 4 picks in 3 games and a couple touchdowns, or 3 weeks in a row with touchdowns. He was ridiculous how on fire he was, but then he kind of faded off there. Bosa's another guy who was like really hot at the beginning of the year. I think kind of slowed down a little bit in the middle and then really picked it up at the end as well, which is why I mentioned him. Aaron Donald had a phenomenal year. We always kind of, I feel like he's I feel like he's kind of getting that LeBron James treatment now, where like, and Michael Jordan treatment, where like they've won the Defensive Player of the Year so many years in a row now that it's just kind of like, we need to see more out of you, even though he's still had like a good year.
The Rams' defense struggled as a unit so much. I think sometimes that takes a little bit of shine off of a potential player, and like for Fitzpatrick, I think part of his problem is another one of the top contenders is TJ Watt. They're teammates.
Well, and you got
so sometimes you split the vote, or people think, well, it was really more of a team effort.
Oh yeah. No, yeah, it was Watt. I was thinking of Devin White, but I think he's in the Rookie of the Year one. So yeah, I mean, and Watt he had a good year too. So yeah, I would go. Like I said, White for me was more of just like a kind of like heart pick. Like I'm like, I'd love to see that guy because I feel like he doesn't get enough notice, and some of it is because he's obviously
Buffalo in general really doesn't get enough notice. I mean, they quietly had one of the better seasons. Sean McDermott should definitely be in Coach of the Year discussion, but I bet he's not even in the top 3 of vote getters.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. All right, so offensive rookie of the year. Who are you taking? Because for me, we differ on this one as well. We kind of talked about it. I think it was on the podcast the other day with me, you, and Dennis. Maybe it was off air.
Yeah.
But I know I'm not actually picking the person that I mentioned in there. But I know we do have 2 different players here. So who are you picking?
Well, this is another one. A lot of times you end up going with a quarterback, and I could definitely see a case being made where Kyler Murray gets it. He did not have a bad season. His team wasn't super successful, and he, I think we forgot about him a little bit because Arizona wasn't in the discussion. I've seen a lot of people shilling for Josh Jacobs, and I forgot he had a quietly decent season as well, but the one I went with was AJ Brown. He had a 1,000-yard season and a lot of big plays during that crucial stretch where the Titans were making the run to the playoffs, and it's not a high volume passing offense.
Yeah.
And I thought his ability and his big playability was one of the things that, alongside Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill, was really kept them relevant and took them into the playoffs.
So for me, it was I'll give the list of the guys they have on here. So you got Josh Jacobs, Kyler Murray, AJ Brown, Terry McLaurin, Miles Sanders, Debo, and DK, and all of them really had phenomenal seasons. The reason I not really pushing the Josh Jacobs narrative, and I know a lot of people think I hate Josh Jacobs. I don't hate him. I do in a way think he's kind of overrated. He did have a good year for Oakland. I'm sure a lot of the lack of production in the second half was the fact he was playing with the separated shoulder. Not easy to do as a running back, especially when you're getting hit on almost every single play. But when it comes down to it, Miles Sanders ended up having a better season. So I can't put him above him. I did like Terry McLaurin. He was the one that we talked about on the podcast Monday that I thought had a better year than AJ Brown. And with the 2 of those guys the way they were, that was kind of why I went with Kyler Murray. You were just kind of mentioning it did have a really good year. Obviously, his team didn't do much, but I think just kind of the questions around him and Arizona with him coming in there with Cliff Kingsbury, and everybody was kind of like, can they really do this? And I thought he had a really, really good year. A lot of people did not expect him to be able to play this well. Really, I think, kind of tried to hold himself back a little bit with his legs early in the season. We really saw him kind of take off running-wise in the second half of the season, where I think they kind of decided to open up the offense a little bit more. I love what I saw out of Kyler Murray. Interested to see if that continues into next year, but he was the one that I ended up taking as my offensive rookie of the year. I think A.J. Brown is right there, too. I think those two are probably going to be the top two. For me, I think the list has Jacobs up at the top. I wouldn't give a vote to Jacobs, but I think if it comes down to Kyler Murray or A.J. Brown. Defensive Rookie of the Year. This one, I think it should be close between two players that are not close on this list. So I'm going to give the list, and then you can tell me who yours is. So Nick Bosa, Devin Bush, Josh Allen, Juan Thornhill, Max Crosby, Devin White, and C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Who did you pick for Defensive Rookie of the Year?
Nick Bosa. I just think in terms of sheer impact and obviously what we saw with what it meant to San Francisco, he's another one. If you had extended voting into the playoffs, he would be a lead pipe cinch.
Yeah, it was Nick Bosa for me too, though I do think Max Crosby from Oakland should be, at least, not that anybody wants to finish second, but I think he should be second or right there with Bosa. Actually had a really good year, and I don't think a lot of people are talking about him at all. Devin Bush, obviously, is same, had a phenomenal year, but I think in a way, all three of those, him, T.J. Watt, and Minkah Fitzpatrick, all kind of cannibalize each other are going to cannibalize each other a little bit on the votes for the Defensive Player of the Year. Might hurt Bush with the Rookie of the Year votes as well. So it's Bosa for me as well, and then I think Max Crosby, who they have on here, is like the fifth best, who I think should be right there at second. If you guys really go look into his stats, really, really good year, surprisingly, and I did not realize how good of a year he ended up having for the Raiders defense, because we don't really talk about the Raiders defense being any good.
We don't really talk about the Raiders being good, so.
Very true. I mean, they had a couple good weeks, but yeah, outside of that, yeah.
They actually had a quietly pretty decent season.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Considering they're the youngest team in football, we saw they really committed to that rookie movement. A lot of people thought they were going to completely crater when the Antonio Brown crap went down. And a lot of times you see that team that's on Hard Knocks falling apart. We did not see that. I thought John Gruden definitely did a nice job with them. And, they're a team that'll be interesting to watch for a couple of years, sadly, for me.
Yeah, I think he really earned his paycheck this year after everything we saw with Antonio Brown in the offseason and all that drama and everything else, and to really actually be in the playoff hunt, I think, going into week 16, or I don't remember if they were really in it. No,
it was the last week.
Was it? Okay,
it
so
was
even
week 17, it was, they were even still alive through the morning games. It was just they lost, obviously, to Denver, the runner-up for Offensive Rookie of the Year, Drew Lock.
All right, so Coach of the Year. Here is the list. I'm going to give two on mine, who I want to win it, and then who I think's going to win it. So Coach of the Year candidates: John Harbaugh, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McDermott, Sean Payton, Brian Flores, Matt LaFleur, Mike Vrabel, Mike Tomlin, Bill Belichick, Andy Reid, and for good God knows what reason, Adam Gase somehow made his name onto this list. Go ahead and give me yours, and then I will tell you who I picked.
If Adam Gase wins, will the city of New York burn?
I think so. I mean, that
between that and what's happening with the Knicks, I think people may just openly.
I don't like seriously.
I don't know what case could you possibly make for him even being on a short list. Like Brian Flores, I know they didn't win, but what he did was incredible with that team. I mean, that's. My pick was Kyle Shanahan. I mean, obviously 49ers went from worst to first. I believe they had a top 2 draft pick last year, wasn't Bosa pick number 2?
Yes.
To, being the top seed in the NFC, I would wager John Harbaugh is probably going to win, but
you think so?
That team has had a long record of success, and I know that what they did this year was pretty impressive, but they were a playoff team last year. It's not like they went out of nowhere and built it up. My top 2, if I was voting, would be Shanahan and Vrabel.
Interesting. So, I do think Shanahan wins it. I don't think Harbaugh wins it because of what you just said. They were in the playoffs the last year, and the 49ers were the number 2 pick. Now, you do have to throw in a little bit of a caveat, too, with the 49ers and how many injuries they had. I mean, they lost Jimmy G early on in the season as well. So that's obviously plays in to why they were so bad. But to be the number 2 pick the year prior and then go up to being the best team in the NFC, I think speaks a lot to him. Who I would love to see win it is Brian Flores because of what he did in Miami, taking that team, and getting 4 wins with the team where they sold off all of their best players. And not that Ryan Fitzpatrick is a bad quarterback, but to then bring him in and be like, we're actually going to try and win games after the whole front office and owner were talking about tanking the entire season. And then they decided to reverse narrative on that when Brian Flores started winning with players that you probably should be harder to win with. I mean, they were in a lot of games. It was not like they were getting blown out and then won a couple games. No, they were in almost every single game that they played and ended up getting 4 wins. So he's not going to win it because they only got 4 wins, but I think he should be considered more highly, I guess. But yeah, I actually hope and do think that Shanahan wins it. I want to throw this one on there as well because I didn't put it in the notes. But executive of the year, I'm gonna read through the list here. You got Eric DeCosta of the Baltimore Ravens, John Lynch of the 49ers, Brandon Beane of Buffalo, John Robinson of the Titans, Mike Mayock of the Raiders, I'm gonna butcher his last name, but Brian Gutekunst of the Packers, John Schneider of the Seahawks, Brett Veach of the Chiefs, and Bill O'Brien of the Texans. That still just makes me laugh, which I guess we can tie in the fact that if you guys haven't heard the news, Bill O'Brien did appoint himself Bill O'Brien as the GM of the Houston Texans now, so I would imagine he's about
the owner did. They said Cal McNair came out and officially appointed him, said he's been doing the job, so might as well have the title.
So probably after the Super Bowl, GM Bill O'Brien will announce a lifetime contract for head coach Bill O'Brien. So I imagine that pairing is going to go over very well. If I had to pick executive of the year, I would give kind of a clean sweep here, and it would go to John Lynch as well. Just for what they've been able to do there. I know, I'm sure you, being a Broncos fan, are a fan of John Lynch. I remember when he got this GM job, getting called out of the booth there was a lot of questions about that. Him getting paired with Kyle Shanahan. Obviously, a lot of people loved Kyle Shanahan, but they were all kind of like, is John Lynch really going to be a GM? We've seen Elway kind of struggle with that a little bit. I think he's done a really good job everywhere outside of quarterback, though I think they got their quarterback of the future in lock. But there were a lot of questions about Lynch and what he's been able to do in building this 49ers team. I think is extremely impressive. So if I had to pick, I would say Lynch and Shanahan win the Executive of the Year and Coach of the Year. Do you have a vote for Executive of the Year? Do you have someone you think should win it?
Lynch wins it too. He's the one that I would pick, but a guy that I think is underrated in that group that should get more consideration than he does is Mike Mayock.
Yeah, I agree. You could really say the same thing about him. Gets called out of NFL Network's draft coverage stuff, and everybody was kind of like, can he really do this? And I'm going to say, not even just what he did with the draft this year, but with the way he handled the Antonio Brown situation. Same thing with Gruden. They did a really good job. I am obviously, I like the Broncos to succeed because I consider you a friend. I want you to be happy, just like I'm sure you hope for the same thing for the Browns because we both hate being miserable when it comes time to record on Mondays and our teams are not doing good. But I'm terrified of what the Raiders might become. They really do look like they're building a good team there. And the move to Las Vegas, I think things are looking up for Oakland. I do like what Mike Mayock did this year, with John Gruden for sure.
But it's kind of, to me, always about being able to separate your fandom. I'm not going to root for the Raiders to win. I'm not sad when they lose. Versus being able to objectively see what that always kills me a little bit on Broncos Twitter when people say Patrick Mahomes isn't that good. Well, you know what? The dude threw for 50 some plus touchdowns last year, and he burned our ass 4 times in a row. So until we can get a win, I don't see the point of he's overrated. No, he's not.
I wish I could be as objective as you, but I do still think Lamar Jackson sucks. So I guess I haven't quite hit the plateau that you have. I cannot be. I'm just kidding. Lamar Jackson is a very good player. Comeback player of the year. There's actually a lot of really interesting names on here. I do think the there's one, I do think the player at the top of this list here is likely going to be the one who wins it because of what he did and the way what he did with this team. But I could honestly see like a bunch of players on here winning this. So, the list is Ryan Tannehill, Darren Waller, Dalvin Cook, Jimmy Garoppolo, Brandon Brooks, Earl Thomas, Cooper Kupp, and Travis Frederick. Who did you pick to win?
So it was a tough choice for me between Dalvin Cook, who I thought had a monster year and was much more responsible for the Vikings' success than a quarterback who shall not be named. But I ultimately went with Ryan Tannehill. I had forgotten Ryan Tannehill was hurt last year.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about him as somebody who, and I think that speaks to Ryan Tannehill's career resurrection. He's a player that was so far out of people's consciousness that we didn't even remember what his last few years were.
Yeah, it was interesting. I kind of wanted to go Dalvin Cook. The only reason I wouldn't is, I'm not necessarily fair to him, the reason he got on this list because he got injured last year, but the fact that he did get injured again at the end of this year and really kind of, maybe not his fault, he may have been able to play, but I think obviously once the Vikings kind of realized they were locked into where they were, they really didn't use him as much toward the back end of the season because they wanted to save him for the playoffs. And I think we can all admit what Ryan Tannehill did was amazing. I mean, he was a guy who everybody was talking about, you could say, 4 or 5 months ago, is he's playing to likely be a backup somewhere to all of a sudden now being possibly the franchise quarterback for the Tennessee Titans, which I don't think anybody would have thought about a year ago. So what he did was just phenomenal. I would think.
Well, he essentially got traded from Miami for like a half bucket of KFC chicken.
Yeah, I don't even think it was that. It was like the lesser brand of fried chicken. It wasn't even KFC. So yeah,
the Dolphins might have paid the Titans to take him.
I think they probably did. That's probably why they only I think they gave him like a 4th round pick, and there was probably some money going under the table. Like here, we'll like eat the rest this part of his salary and everything. But yeah, it's insane to think, and I'm happy for him though too. I've always been a Ryan Tannehill fan. I hated that he's kind of really. We talked about it earlier in the season. He was always good when he was healthy. He would just always get injured, and then things would happen. Everybody kind of forgets that he had that team.
Bad luck.
Yeah,
as we've seen with what Adam Gase has not done for the Jets, maybe more mediocre coaching than we realized.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, what I was going to say was, I think a lot of people forget that he actually had them in the playoff hunt. And actually, they ended up making the playoffs. I think he got hurt in week 14 or 15. I can't remember what it was. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. And they ended up losing in the first round of the playoffs. But so he's had a couple good years. I'm happy to see him kind of get this recognition. So last awards thing that we are going to talk about today before we move on to talking about the big game in the Super Bowl is the play of the year. What is your NFL play of the year?
Now, I'm just going to admit I went with a homer pick here because pretty much, I watched every down of Broncos football, and I watched pieces of other games and highlights of big matchups, so coming up with a play of the year was a little bit tough. What I went with was Courtland Sutton's 26-yard TD to open the scoring in Week 13 against the Chargers. Mm-hmm. That was Drew Lock's first start. A lot of questions about what he was going to be like, and when you have a receiver that can just make some superhuman plays, it makes you look really good. Everybody was pumped up that Drew Lock threw a touchdown, but if you watch, that was all Courtland Sutton. It was not a well-placed or well-thrown ball, and he made a superhuman catch. And I felt like watching him this season, he made a ton of huge plays. If you had the misfortune of watching Joe Flacco's passing offense or some of Brandon Allen's passing offense, Courtland Sutton had an incredible season, in my opinion, considering quarterbacks and lack of they did not really have a wide receiver too after they dealt Emmanuel Sanders in early October. Nobody really stepped up and did anything, and he just kept going out there and making phenomenal plays, and that was probably one of his signature best.
Yeah, I love what Courtland Sutton did. I mean, because I feel like I've referenced this all the time throughout the year, especially when Courtland Sutton came on. I think he's right up there if not in the discussion for one of the top wide receiver ones in not just fantasy, but in the NFL. He's right on the discussion of it. Me and Dennis both had him as our kind of breakout wide receiver this year, but we, as I always want to throw in the caveat, we said that would happen because we did not think Emmanuel Sanders would play. And then Emmanuel Sanders came out and actually balled out that first week. And everybody thought he was back and going to be the guy. And then Courtland Sutton came on and was just dominant the entire season. So I'm with you. I love what I saw out of Sutton. I would imagine you cannot be more thrilled as a Broncos fan to have that guy as your wide receiver one. Because, I saw him torching Denzel Ward out there with Brandon Allen, as you were just talking about when they played the Browns. And I was just like, how is this happening?
Yeah, he made big plays, and really was the star no matter who his quarterback was, which, was something that was very encouraging and exciting for Broncos fans. Noah Fant had a decent season, but he didn't really pick up until we got better quarterback play.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of positives for Denver going forward, but Courtland Sutton, that play when he made that touchdown grab, everybody's like, oh, Drew Lock throws his first touchdown. I was like, he should be going over there and kissing the ring.
Oh yeah. All right, so for me, I had 3. I'm torn between these 3. It's been hard for me to separate them. So the one I know is not going to be in there because it happened in the playoffs, and as we talked about, all these I think are pretty much regular season stuff. But the play by Deshaun Watson in overtime for them to end up getting into field goal range, I thought was just amazing.
Yeah.
That was the first play that stood out in my mind when I was writing down this category, but I don't think those plays are included in this. So there were 2 for me, and I'm big on what you were just kind of talking about with Courtland Sutton. I'm big on wide receivers making just phenomenal plays, cause I love the wide receiver position. So I went with 2 catches and really kind of throws as well that were just incredible throws. So week 8, Aaron Rodgers, where he throws that ball while he's getting tackled, that looks like he's throwing it out of bounds, that Jamal Williams just happened to catch in the back of the end zone against the Kansas City Chiefs, which was actually a huge game for the Packers at the time, and for them to come away with that win. That one was right there, and I have it tied with me. For me, with the Russell Wilson to Tyler Lockett play, which I feel like probably a lot of people forgot about, although I think it was week 3 or 4 maybe? I can't even remember what week it was. It was early in the season. But it may have even been, was that a primetime game? I want to say it was a primetime game as well. I can't remember.
It might have been. Lockett was somebody that, when he was on, he was really on.
Yeah, I think that injury at the end of the year is really kind of what hurt him, kind of in really with a couple of the players we've been talking about today with the injuries. But yeah, that catch was just, I would say almost the same thing about the Aaron Rodgers play. Russell Wilson looked like he was throwing it out of bounds, and then Tyler Lockett catches it out of bounds.
I think it was a Monday Night Football game.
It may have been. I know they were playing the Rams.
I feel like it was.
I remember they were playing the Rams, but I don't remember when it was. I was trying to pull it up. My phone is not.
Maybe it was a Thursday night game.
Was it Thursday? I was trying to pull up the schedule.
But my phone is being about that. Annoying. When they played the Rams, I'm pretty sure it was a Thursday night game.
Let's see.
It was one of the first Fox telecasts.
Yep, you're right. Thursday night.
That was before we thought, at that point in time, I was like, well, Seattle started decent, but the Rams are probably still a better team. And after they won that game and seeing how they played, I was like, well, maybe I was wrong about that.
So it was week 5, not week 3 or 4. I couldn't remember. It was definitely early season. So week 5, it was Thursday night, Rams Seahawks. So yeah, and like I said, just phenomenal catch. That's going to be I don't know if they do a catch of the year, but I imagine that's going to be in discussions for catch of the year as well. It was a phenomenal play. So I think that should be right up there. I didn't see a category. I saw the category for it, but I didn't see any nominations or anything on the page that I had up. So I don't know what will or will not be on there, but I think all those are definitely, worthy plays.
Well, if you want to relive some of the great moments, I watched for a little bit today when I was trying to think about, not being a homer pick before I gave in to my lesser instincts. NFL Network has a 22.5-minute sizzle reel of the best plays of 2019.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I will definitely have to watch that here in a little bit. All right, so we spent about 40 minutes here talking about NFL honors, so let's jump in and talk about the most important thing that is going to happen this weekend, and that is going to be the Super Bowl.
We eating all day, bro. I'm hitting you every time. Every time you come this way, I'm going to hit you. I'm not going to be able to do that. You don't want no problems, bro. You are my boy.
We have what looks like is going to be a phenomenal Super Bowl between the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers. I mean, I've seen it seems a lot more high scoring predictions than low scoring, and I do think it's going to be a high scoring affair here. Redemption Bowl for Andy Reid and Kyle Shanahan, as well as both of them have been there, and kind of, I don't want to say been the main reasons their teams lost, but obviously both their teams lost. Andy Reid back with the Eagles Patriots a long time ago, and then obviously Kyle Shanahan just a couple of years ago, another victim of the Patriots as well, up 28 to, I think it was 12 at that point. Everybody always says it was a 28
to 3.
Yeah, but I mean, it wasn't 28-3 at the time that they started. Like the big play that everybody criticizes him for when it was that 3rd and 1 play, and they decided to have Matt Ryan do the 7-step drop that caused him to get sacked, where they should have just run the ball and run timeout. But they ended up trying to do a passing play. I know it wasn't 28-3 at the point that happened, but yes, it's the very famous 28-3 game, unfortunately, for Falcons fans. So we're going to start it off with, we're supposed to hoping to have Tony on here, but he had some stuff come up with his podcast, Huddle Up, by the way. Definitely check it out, guys. It is well worth it. He does a good job on that. So we wanted to rank, we've got 10 different groups here. We're going to rank them 1 through 10. I'm going to give you the list real quick, and then I'm going to have you rank yours, and we'll just kind of go 1-1 and kind of go down them. So you got the coaching staff for both teams, the running back group for both teams, the receiving weapons for both teams, so wide receivers and tight ends, then the defenses, and then the quarterbacks. So who was your number 1, or who did you think, 1 being the best, 10 being the worst, who did you rank as your number 1 out of these 10 groups?
So I went with San Francisco coaching staff, and this isn't just about Kyle Shanahan. Obviously, we talked about him being coach of the year, but I think with Robert Saleh,
yes.
Defensively, both of those guys, the San Francisco is an incredibly talented and deep team. Mm-hmm. I would say that the actual star on offense and defense are those two coaches. Nick Bosa is probably the most recognizable player on the defensive side, and you have people like Kittle, and veterans like Sanders who are bigger names. But, what I've been impressed with San Francisco is they've been able to win in a lot of different ways, both offensively and defensively, and I think that's a real credit to coaching. Their special teams has been great too. And I just think that actually is the heart of the San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah. So they're high for me, but not at 1. For me, I went the receiving options for Kansas City. I just think they're so explosive. And for me, I think if Kansas City's going to end up winning this game, I think they're going to be a big reason why. I think they're kind of you could argue the best group on the field. I think the argument would be between them and probably the defensive front for San Francisco. I think it's kind of like the best 2 groups on the field, if that makes sense. So I ended up going with the receiving options because you add in Kelsey in there as well. I think they're really good. I'll give you my 2. That was Patrick Mahomes. I think he's obviously going to be another big reason. He's your 2 as well. So I think obviously the better quarterback, probably, again, same thing, one of the best offensive players on the field. He's going to be huge going up against that defense. Since he is your 2, do you have anything you want to add to that, or do you want to? Who is your 3 if you don't?
No, I just think to me, Patrick Mahomes is the difference in Andy Reid's career.
Yeah.
We've talked about it. He's been a successful coach who's often come up short on some of the biggest stages. I think Patrick Mahomes is just at a different level than quarterbacks he's had in the past. And to me, he's the best single player.
Yeah,
on the field.
I agree.
My number 3 was the San Francisco defense. They just have a lot of ferocious pieces. They have a lot of depth, and the way that they can disrupt and take apart. I mean, we saw them do that in both their playoff games, just completely smothering Dalvin Cook one week, and then the next week completely taking apart Aaron Rodgers' ability to get anything. Rodgers' numbers and Devontae Adams' numbers look a lot better thanks to some of the way they were able to move the ball in the second half. But I watched that game. That game was over at halftime.
So I just realized how close our rankings really are. I wasn't really looking at yours until we have the same top 4, just in a different order. My defense, San Francisco's defense is 3 for me as well. For San Francisco's side, I think they're going to be the key. One of the interesting stats I heard though, which I don't want to fall into the trap, but I kind of was today when I heard it was when he is blitzed, actually by either the front seven, because he has different stats here if you bring in cornerback. So I'll give you that. Patrick Mahomes actually has a 99 quarterback rating. Like it's the best, the next best. Do you want to take a guess how low when being blitzed, when facing an all-out blitz, what the next best quarterback rating is?
88?
17.
Oh.
Yeah. It's ridiculous, right? Like, when you hear that, you're just like 99 to 17, like, holy crap. So, in a way, and I'll save this more for obviously when we start breaking down the game, but that does worry me a little bit about San Francisco's side because of how much they rely on those guys. However, he was, I believe it was 50% when a cornerback comes on the blitz for some reason. So, and we do know they can do that as well because San Francisco has a phenomenal secondary. So all around, they are my 3. And then coming in at 4 for me is actually the San Francisco coaching who you had at 1. And I just pretty much agree with everything you say. It's not just Kyle Shanahan. What Salah does on the defensive side is beautiful. I mean, I'm not going to lie. The more and more I've watched the 49ers games, the more and more I'm like, God, I really wish the Browns would have taken him as their head coach. But I still believe in you, Stefanski. If you're listening, do you, brother. I'm still rooting for you, but God, I would have loved Salah. All right, so who do you have at 5?
So at 4, I had Kansas City's receivers.
Yeah, sorry, that was my 1.
We talked about a little bit. We have the same top 4 in a different order. I'm not as enamored of their, I like Travis Kelce, and I think Tyreek Hill has some incredible big play and weaponry ability. I'm not as taken with the depth behind them. I think Sammy Watkins can be great or non-existent, and Mecole Hardman, I like his potential talent, but he was real uneven. Demarcus Robinson, same thing. They're not a bad group. I don't want to sound overly critical, but that was my number 5. I actually went with San Francisco's receivers. I think their passing offense hasn't been a huge factor in the playoffs, and people forget. I mean, I was blessed to watch Emmanuel Sanders for years. He is an incredible receiver. He was incredible to start this season with Joe Flacco as well. George Kittle, I actually think he might be the best tight end in football. And I really like Deebo Samuel. He has great range and ability. We've seen him break big running plays and passing plays. They don't use their passing offense as much, but then you have like role players. We've seen Kendrick Bourne explode for some big games. I think San Francisco's receiving core is a little underrated and a little overlooked because of running and because of the way they've dominated in other facets of the game.
So a little bit of foreshadowing here. We have our 5 and 6 is our flip flops. So, my 5 is the running backs for San Francisco. We did get a note earlier today that Tevin Coleman is still limited, so I don't know how much he plays. But Raheem Mostert has been ridiculous. I think a lot of people kind of forget about how good Matt Breida has been at times. I think they, are just going to be really good. We've talked about it before. Kansas City's defense really is not that good up front and the linebacker core. Their secondary is good. They tend to do really good against the receiving groups, and I do think, Tyrann Mathieu is probably going to line up against George Kittle, which should be a really interesting matchup because Mathieu has been really good this year as well. I think the weakness there is the running game, so I think they're going to have to rely on that. So that's my 5, and then my 6 is the San Francisco wide receiver group. Obviously, and George Kittle in there as well. And you are right. I mean, it's not even just, and I'm going to kind of take it a step back as well. Not even just the receiving. I was watching the opening night stuff and watching Emmanuel Sanders interview, like how much he loved blocking as well, which is such a huge part of Kyle Shanahan's offense. And you have to have wide receivers.
That's a big thing for Kittle, too.
Yeah.
Kittle, he appreciates a good block more than he does a catch.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. It still goes back to, I don't remember if you'll remember this, that video I tagged you and Tony in a long time ago, probably back like 6-7 weeks ago now, where George Kittle flattened some dude in the end zone, and when he rolled over the dude in the camera because they had scored a touchdown, and the end zone camera was coming over to see the players celebrating, and it comes over George Kittle, and he's just like full belly laughing because he pancaked some dude. So yeah, their blocking alone, I think, is what makes them so crucial to this game because they're also willing to do it as well. Like, you have people who are going to come out and say, oh yeah, I love run blocking and everything. But you go back and watch it and you can see some wide receivers kind of give the half-hearted block here and there, and they don't do that. They go full in. And I'm with you on the Sanders getting underrated. Bourne, Debo has been all over the place as well. And then you add in Kittle, who I think should be the tight end one moving forward with everything he does as well. Just a phenomenal group, and they're there when Jimmy G and Kyle Shanahan needs them, which I don't think should be understated. Like, yes, they don't get used that much, but when they do, they come up big and they keep the offense on the field, which is a key category for them. So since I know your 6 is the running backs, give me a little bit on them if you want for San Francisco, and then give us your 7.
Yeah, I think obviously San Francisco has just a solid group of backs, so I put them 6. The receivers, running backs, I bumped receivers up a little bit more because I think they have some more top end stars, but the running backs have been really solid. My 7, I went with Kansas City coaching staff, and this is where you start to get hard. Because it seems like you're really knocking these things. And let's face it, both these teams are in the Super Bowl for a reason. But I don't, Kansas City, I like Andy Reid, but Andy Reid has a real checkered history in important playoff games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he does.
Going back to Philadelphia and that time, I like Eric Bieniemy, but he doesn't have a ton of experience. Coaching wise, they obviously have a decent coaching staff or they wouldn't be in the Super Bowl, but for me, that's just kind of where it shook out.
No, that's the same for me at sitting here. So at 7, I have the KC coaching staff as well. I'm my only reason I dropped them. So I do have the same questions about Reid. We talked about it before, not just with Philadelphia, but even with Kansas City, back with Alex Smith and even when he had Philadelphia getting into the playoffs, he always had kind of this moniker with him that he never managed the time clock well. I remember going back to that Super Bowl actually with Philadelphia. They didn't really seem to be moving the offense quickly when they needed to get a couple scores there. Same thing in Kansas City. He's always seemed to kind of mismanage the clock. Now he's done a better job of that recently. That really seems like they've just kind of lost in bad ways. For instance, last year with the D4 thing and the Patriots, they should have won that game. So I do think he's kind of turned that around. I think a lot of that is Bieniemy coming in and really kind of running the offense and allowing Reid to see the bigger picture. Because back in the day, many people might not remember, he was the one calling all the plays and everything, where now he's kind of relinquished that to Bieniemy for a while. My fear is just the defense. I don't think, I can't even remember who their defensive coordinator is now off the top of my head.
I couldn't either, and that's probably
I want to say, is it Spagnuolo? Is it Steve Spagnuolo? I want to say that's who it is, but I don't remember. But he just, he does not, clearly if we can't even remember his name, he does not inspire much confidence in my opinion. So he was one of the big reasons why I dropped him. Will he be able to make any kind of, adjustments in the second half or anything with whatever San Francisco decides to do? And can he match wits with Kyle Shanahan, which I think is going to be huge. So who is your number 8?
It is Steve Spagnuolo.
Okay.
I just looked at, so.
I was typing that in right there. So yeah,
this is actually his first year with them. If you remember, the Chiefs really kind of scapegoated. I can't remember who their D coordinator was last year, but after they lost that AFC Championship game, Bob Sutton. Yeah. They bumped him out and Spagnuolo came in. My number 8 was KC's defense. I don't think their defense is great, but I think it might be a little bit better than some people have thought. They were not super solid at the beginning of the season, but to their credit, I will say it seemed like down the stretch they figured some more things out. Because they were a team that won their last 6 games.
Yeah. So same for me, the Kansas City defense here. And it goes back to what I was just talking about. My biggest fear with them is I do think their weakness is against the run. And that is kind of obviously San Francisco's strength. And so I do think that's where things are going to be really interesting. I think in a way
they were able to hold Derrick Henry in check.
Which is true, I'm interested because the difference though with, I think for Derrick Henry and what, I don't know how to describe it. Tennessee is clearly more of a power running team. And I do think The difference with Tennessee is, you have A.J. Brown and Ryan Tannehill, as we were talking about earlier with the comeback player of the year stuff, is he had a really good year, but I would trust Jimmy G a little bit more, and I would trust his receiving options more, that if they start to slow down that running game, I mean, a lot of people want to question Jimmy G, myself included. I've done it a lot throughout the year, but then you go back to the New Orleans Saints game where they were stopping the run. And
that's what I was going to say. We've seen the 49ers this year win in passing shootouts when they have to.
Yeah. And so that's where my fear lies, is because that Kansas City defense, their secondary is good. I think a lot of people don't really realize how good their secondary is, but their front seven is it's not that good. And so if they are getting run on, and if they try and switch it up, does then San Francisco and Kyle Shanahan start burning them through the air? And what happens there? So they're there for me, and we have our last two switch. So I'm just going to give my two really quick, and then you can kind of tell me your thoughts on them. I went KC running backs 9, and then Jimmy G 10, which is probably not fair to Jimmy G because I was just talking about how good he can be and then criticized him last. Part of it is recency bias. I am just a little bit worried how much they really haven't used him in the playoffs, and maybe it's a mind trick thing, if that makes sense. Like Kyle Shanahan just kind of using that in his back pocket because he hasn't had to. Because at this point, something Tony I know would throw in my face right now, because he did it a couple weeks ago too when we were talking about Jimmy G, because he has been on the you have to trust Jimmy G with what he's done, and I've always kind of questioned him. You can't question him anymore. So I just kind of put him here last because I feel like he's probably got the biggest question mark. I do think him coming in, he really hasn't been in these situations. This is his first real year as a starter in the playoffs. I mean, I know he's got 2 games under his belt now, but this is a little bit different. I mean, Patrick Mahomes has kind of gone through the bad parts of the playoffs and gotten to where he has. So I feel like he's got just a little bit more experience than Jimmy G does. So that's why I put him last. Running backs, I put 9 just because if Damian Williams and LaShawn McCoy can turn it on for one game, they can be just as dynamic, but I do think there's just a bigger question mark around them. So who are your 9 and 10 and why?
So I had it reversed. I had Jimmy G at 9, and then San Francisco or Kansas City running backs at 10. And I think it's interesting you're talking about if Damian Williams and LaShawn McCoy. That would be part of my hesitation. LaShawn McCoy was a healthy scratch for the AFC Championship game.
Yeah.
What is going on? What is their running back situation? They've almost just said, screw it, we don't need a running back. I know Damian Williams has had a few touchdowns in the postseason, but if you look at his yards and production, it's not overall that impressive. And he's another guy that, I hate to be cold, but has been a touch fragile.
Yeah.
We've seen the last couple, just about the time you get excited by Damian Williams. And I'm somebody that thought he was going to make the most of this opportunity and went in on him in a few leagues this offseason. Just about the time you get excited about him, he screws you. I don't have a lot of faith there. Their entire running back group, you saw him bring back Spencer Ware. We have never really seen Darwin Thompson develop anything more than a couple occasional flashes despite some opportunity. Jimmy G, we've seen him take command and do what he needs to do. I have not seen the Kansas City running back group come through and say, we will win the game for you.
Yeah, I don't disagree. That's probably why I should have put them 10. I just it's my inherent bias against Jimmy G that I think is why I threw him in there at 10. I don't, because then I kind of talked myself out of it as we were going through it. So let's actually dive into the game. What's been interesting for me with KC here the past couple weeks, in these first 2 rounds, they have fallen behind double digits. I don't think that they can do that against San Francisco and still win the game. Obviously came back and just destroyed the Texans in the first game, and then in the second game, I don't want to say destroyed Tennessee, but it was definitely the game got a little bit more out of hand there in the second half. So, what about you? What are your thoughts on if KC were to go down, say 14-0 early in the first quarter? Because in the second quarter, Mahomes has been near perfect. I believe he only has like 1 incompletion, so he's been just amazing the second quarter, but really kind of struggled coming on in the first quarter. If the 49ers are able to jump on them early, get that double-digit lead, how do you see it playing out?
But, I think That would be the concern for me. For KC, if they come out and start slow and let San Francisco build a lead, I think we've seen them do that against fairly prolific pass offenses in these playoffs. This is going to be by far the best defense they faced in the playoffs. The Titans don't have a terrible defense. The Texans' defense is a rumor. Yeah. And the other thing is this will be the most dynamic offense they've faced in the playoffs. The Titans, they did a decent job, and Ryan Tannehill did a decent job, but they did not have a very power pass offense. And if you could gut up and really take Henry away, there was a good chance that you could hold them in check. The opposite kind of being true for the Texans. They don't really have much of a running game to speak of. So if you can take away, especially I'm not sure Fuller even made it through that entire full game. If you could take Hopkins away, you could box in Deshaun Watson, you could kind of keep them in check. That doesn't feel like San Francisco. They both get very excited. They're a great play from ahead defense. Mm-hmm. They pin their ears back. They get creative. They start getting aggressive, as all the best defenses do. And we've seen them on offense. They can win in a lot of different ways. You can't just say, I'm not going to let them run the ball. You can try that, but this isn't a team that has Corey Davis hoping that he's going to make a catch. They have Deebo Samuels, Emmanuel Sanders, George Kittle, the guys we just talked about. They have real good professional players. The depth of San Francisco is what makes them so tough. And you're going to have some motivation. Dee Ford, obviously a guy that the Chiefs scapegoated and decided wasn't worth their time and shipped off to San Francisco. I guarantee he's excited to hit the field and make some stuff happen. So it's not even just one pass rusher that you can take away, which is, what's happened. Sometimes I've seen the Chiefs be able to make an adjustment, especially with Bradley Chubb after he got injured, and be able to kind of use 2 or 3 players and take Von Miller out and limit Denver's ability to cave in and pass rush. With San Francisco, they have a lot of different players that are coming at you from different positions, and that makes it much tougher to defend. And that's, we saw that happen to Green Bay. Green Bay has a decent offensive-minded head coach, and when they got down in a little bit of a hole, it just became a bigger and bigger hole, because then you're pressing, trying to get things done. The emotion of playing in a Super Bowl. The one thing I will say, Jimmy G hasn't been a player, but he's been in so many Super Bowls.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. The stage is not going to impact him as much as Patrick Mahomes. There's something about even the greatest players being in that first game that it's different than what you're expecting.
So, I don't think they can either. I do think they would still be able to get back in the game and be able to keep it close just because of how explosive that offense is, but I'm with you. That would play perfectly into what San Francisco, I think, wants to do. If they're able to get up 10-14 and then just start running the clock and allowing that defense to get after you, you got those cornerbacks that can play more aggressive, and we've seen Richard Sherman, regardless of what you want to say about him and his age and if he's getting worse, that dude is just, he steps up in the playoffs and he makes big plays. He'll be out there ball hawking. You got Bosa and Armstead and Buckner coming after you, and I know Mahomes is, mobile and can get out of the pocket, but still, those 4 guys coming after you is not going to be easy as well. So I'm with you. I do think it's going to be hard for them to do, or to come back and end up winning if that happens. And I'm shook here. I don't know if you're paying any attention to Twitter right now, but things are going off the rails by a picture that was just tweeted out. We can save that for the end of the podcast. Just look up Tom Brady really quick and see what you see. It's a lot of people are freaking out. I feel like Brady's actually probably trolling all of us right now. But we'll touch on that here as we finish. I want to finish the Super Bowl because that is more important at the moment. For San Francisco and KC, I'll go first. Biggest reason they win the game for San Francisco, I think it's going to end up being their defense. They're going to have to step up big, and find a way to limit this offensive explosion, or the ability to explode on offense that the Chiefs had, especially with all their weapons. I don't think you can stop Patrick Mahomes, but can you contain him? So I do think Salah, and that defense are going to have to come out, make adjustments if the Chiefs come out on fire, what adjustments they make, because that's something I think has been really underrated in when these offenses start doing something against this defense. The way that they adjust to it has been really good. I think, again, speaks to just how good Salah is as a defensive coordinator. So I think he's going to be the big reason why San Francisco, if they win. And then KC, we have the same ones. It's Mahomes. Can 15 do 15 things and end up pulling out some great play to cause KC to win the game. So for you, what will happen and why San Francisco wins and why KC wins?
Yeah, see, for me, I think both these teams are very talented and they're very close. And it's going to be a tough game, but I think the battle is between the things that I put as 1 and 2. Can San Francisco make coaching adjustments and use their depth and their players to overcome whatever challenges come? And on the flip side, can Patrick Mahomes rise above, as he's seemingly done throughout this season and throughout the playoffs? In both those games, being behind, he rallied and picked him up. You saw his superhuman performance seemingly against the Texans, and then against the Titans, that run that he took in by himself. Those were the plays that kind of shift the tide, that say, hey, I will not lose. And I think you're going to see that's really the chess match here. Yeah. The offensive and defensive adjustments that Shanahan and Salah can make versus Patrick Mahomes' force of will.
Yeah, so I feel the most confident part was what I wanted to talk about next. We're both on Patrick Mahomes. We've kind of talked about that a lot and the way that they attack on offense, so I feel like we can kind of skip that. I don't feel like there's much more to talk about that. But San Francisco's side, you put on here clock management and coaching. Kind of explain why you are so confident in that for San Francisco's side and then causing them to win the game.
That was actually Tony's note.
Oh,
mine was
bad.
Coaching, the kind of coaching and defense. Just kind of what we talked about. Offensively, I feel like San Francisco is going to make the adjustments they need to use either the run or the pass to move the ball and score. And defensively, it just seems like when San Francisco's been on and been really good, their defense figures out what they need to do to totally take you off the game.
Yeah, and I mean, so the last couple points on there I feel like we've really kind of touched on, so I'm just going to kind of go off the cuff here. It was who we had the most confidence in, and then the weaknesses and strengths of the teams. We kind of talked about that in our rankings, and so I think everybody's kind of gotten the gist of where we stand on that stuff. So going into this game, I do, as you mentioned, I do think these are very evenly matched teams. I would imagine you think too, it is going to be a good Super Bowl. You don't think either side gets blown out here, do you?
No,
okay.
No, I would be shocked, and let's all just pray that it's a better game than it was last year.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't hate last year's game. Definitely more of a defensive struggle last year. Obviously, you want to see some points being scored. That definitely did kind of suck about last year's. I would imagine it's going to be more. What worries me, and this might bring you a little bit of joy here, number one offense against the number one defense. We've seen this happen many a times, and the defense always wins. Most recently, Denver Broncos, Carolina Panthers. A lot of people may not remember how good that Panthers offense was. Cam Newton as MVP. I mean, they came in there high flying. Steve Smith, Greg Olsen. I mean, they were a great offense, and Denver's defense was no joke either. DeMarcus Ware, Von Miller, you had Wolf still there. I'm trying to remember who your
Chris Harris, Aqib Talib.
Aqib Talib, that's who I was trying to remember. Harris was there. I was trying to remember Aqib Talib. Obviously, that was Peyton Manning's kind of last leg there. He was obviously not playing as great as he had been the year prior, where he set the touchdown records and everything. Really, I think those neck and injuries, everything had kind of finally piled up, and that defense came out there and, I mean, smoked the Panthers. Smoked them. Do you have any fear at all that it might end up being that way? Now, if I remember correctly, Carolina kind of came back into that a little bit. Yes, I don't remember them getting completely blown out, but it wasn't really as close as the final score indicated, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was just so low scoring that Denver really never had more than much more than a one possession advantage. Right. CJ Anderson had a really nice game and was able to score, and defense did well, but people forget how unreliably bad Peyton Manning was at times that season. He had lost more than a step, and he had actually missed quite a bit of time during that season too with injury. But so it's interesting you brought up that game, because when I was writing my official pick, which I posted today, I picked San Francisco, but what I said concerned me the most thinking about it. You point out the top offense versus top defense. What I was thinking about was that Carolina and Denver Super Bowl. I remember going into that game during the championship round, Denver had to battle the Patriots and had a somewhat competitive game to make it in. It was very close and very tight. Carolina went out and just destroyed, I believe it was the Cardinals.
Yeah.
Just rolled them. And so the presumption was, they have been crushing teams in the playoffs. Well, if you were looking at this game, the Chiefs have had to come from behind both games. They obviously have a much more impressive offense than Denver did in 2015. But it was San Francisco that just kind of came out and didn't have much of a challenge in the NFC Championship game.
Right.
I realize that game looks a little better because of some touchdowns in the second half, but it was 27-0 at halftime. That game was over.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the 49ers did certainly look like they took the pedal off the gas in the second half. And so that in the back of my mind was a little bit of I remember that probably more for Carolina in that Super Bowl than even the offense versus defense. But we have seen that, that happened to Denver in 2013. That was the year Manning put all those records and had by far and away the best passing offense. We were just crushing people. And Seattle came in with little Russell Wilson and kind of an upstart Legion of Boom, and all of a sudden Manny Ramirez snaps the ball out of the back of the end zone on the first play, and I was like, oh my God. I remember my dad had just moved to Colorado, and we were so excited to watch a Super Bowl together. My wife's making food upstairs, and by the time she brings it down halfway through the first quarter, I was like, well, the game's over. She's like, what do you mean? Are we winning? I'm like, no. So, hopefully we don't see anything like that. I feel like Patrick Mahomes would not go out that way. And maybe that's me admiring him a little too much as a second-year starter, but I just feel like even if they don't win, he's not going to go out that way.
Yeah, I don't think it will. I really do think it's going to be a close game, but I am kind of worried that you go back and look at some of these most recent games where it has been number one offense, number one defense, and it always seems the defense ends up winning the game. So I was interested, especially because, again, you being the Broncos fan and kind of seeing both sides of it as well, seeing obviously the bad side first and then the good side the year after, how that worked out for you. I'm trying
we kind of saw that play out last year, too, because the Rams had that vaunted offense.
Yeah, that's true.
Playing with the defensive, mastermind Bill Belichick, and all of a sudden, no one would have bet the Rams scoring 3 points.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would say on that is I think a lot of that is more probably Sean McVay than really that offense with how smart he was with play calling, because I'm not saying that you are, but obviously nobody's going to compare Jared Goff and Patrick Mahomes. Those two are definitely far cries from each other. But yeah, that is true as well. I kind of forgot about last year's, probably because it was so low scoring, and you kind of forget seeing that, as you just said, 3 points, that the Rams offense was as good as they are. So, man, I'm been torn. I guess it's time to make a pick here, and I've been torn. I've been going back and forth on this. Before I ask you who you're picking to win and the score, if it's different than who you're picking, who would you like to see win? Like if you had to go with your heart instead of your head, who would your heart want you to see win this game?
Well, it would be the same for me. San Francisco. No Broncos fan in good conscience can be rooting for the Kansas City Chiefs. But beyond that, Emmanuel Sanders played for us and went over. Kyle, growing up, saw plenty of Kyle. His dad it probably still is my favorite football coach of all time, right. Mike Shanahan. That was the formative years for me with Denver. I would love to see him. John Lynch. I have a John Lynch Broncos jersey. Always been a guy that I really liked. So beyond just I don't want to live in a world where Kansas City won the Super Bowl. There are actual legitimate reasons why I'm drawn to San Francisco.
See, so I'm really torn on this because I would love to see either side win it. Obviously Kyle Shanahan, I think he's, it was just 1 year in Cleveland, and I loved what he did with that offense. That was back with Johnny Manziel, and he actually made Johnny Manziel look decent. So, that's telling you something right there. I like Kyle Shanahan. I hate the moniker that he gets after what happened with Atlanta. I'd love to see him bounce back. I like a lot of those San Francisco 49ers. I'm not a huge fan of Richard Sherman, but, outside of him, I like a lot of the San Francisco 49ers. I'd love to see Andy Reid get it, though. I feel like he's one of the best coaches that have been in the NFL game. I don't want to say he's like, he might be top 10. He's not up there with Bill and Landry, Shula, those guys, but I do think he's probably in the top 10 of best coaches of all time, and I would love to see him get a Super Bowl, because I do think that's kind of the one thing that is held against him. And I'm with you in a way, though. I kind of don't want to see Kansas City win it, but I do think if they lose it again, that's just going to make those guys even hungrier. So it's hard for me. I've been waffling back and forth, so I'm going to let you go first. Who are you picking to win, and what is the final score, in your opinion, going to be?
I picked San Francisco 31-28.
Okay. All right, so my official one, and I'm gonna stick with it. I'm gonna go Kansas City, and I have it 35-34. I think, surprisingly, the ironic way I put it is, I think the Kansas City defense is actually gonna come up with a big play at the end of the game to seal the victory for them, cost them a chance to get into the playoffs last year, or into the Super Bowl last year, and by many accounts is probably the weakest unit altogether on this field, and I think they're going to be the ones that come up with the big play. And unfortunately for me, I know you don't want to see it as well. I kind of don't want to see it, but we'll get the Kansas City Chiefs a Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes in his second year, one of the very few quarterbacks to actually ever do that, I think is going to be hoisting the Lombardi. If San Francisco wins, who do you think is going to be the Super Bowl MVP? Because I still think that's a little bit more interesting, because I don't think it's as solid as I think if Kansas City wins, everybody's going to say it's probably Patrick Mahomes, right? You would think Kansas City wins the Super Bowl, he's probably the Super Bowl MVP. If San Francisco wins, who do you think gets the MVP award?
I think that's really an impossible thing to predict, because we're talking about a team that has 6 or 7 different weapons. I think it would be more like, the couple of times we've seen teams win the Super Bowl and nobody, even like last year with New England, there was not, one guy that was head and tails above the rest, but Edelman had, probably the biggest game. You have 2 or 3 different receivers that could do it. You have 2 or 3 different running backs that could do it. Jimmy G could do it. It could be a defensive player, San Francisco, that is not a team I would bet on an MVP option in Las Vegas, because I don't even know how you get odds good enough to make that enticing.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, just for fun, I'm gonna say Nick Bosa. Nick Bosa gets a strip sack, fumble, touchdown, and that's what ends up getting him the MVP if San Francisco ends up winning it. So
my feeling is probably, for me, I guess if I had to pick one, it would be Kittle.
Okay, very interesting. I like that. All right, so before we get out of here, 2 big news items have kind of been dropped here as we've been recording. The first one's easier, so we'll jump and do that really quick. Greg Olsen and the Panthers are parting ways, and not really surprising there. I think a lot of people kind of expected that. He had only signed that 2-year deal, so fantasy-wise, You probably can't get him now, but if you have Ian Thomas, things are looking up for you. Great career for Greg Olsen. I think he's probably going to make it into the Hall of Fame. Kind of the same thing for Christian McCaffrey. Kind of sucks that he has to go out this way, especially with the injuries he's had the past couple seasons. Anything you want to add on Greg Olsen?
I hope he is our new Monday Night Football guy.
Yeah, I actually agree with you on that. I hope so too. He is very good. He's I think the past 4 or 5 years has on his bye weeks done a lot of stuff on sidelines and in booths and everything. I'd love to see that because we all really kind of
he was very close to going to the broadcast booth before this last season. I think he kind of got talked into one more ride, which I would wager regretted once they lost Newton after week 2.
Yeah, I'm sure. So I'm with you. I'd love to see him there as well. And then last but not least, it's not really a news item, but Tom Brady, did you see it?
Yeah, the picture of him in the, walking, you can't tell if it's walking off the field or onto the field.
Yeah. Any thoughts on it?
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, why? I really think he's just trolling all of us at this point.
Yeah, so it wasn't an incredible season. And, I think as they get a little bit further away, I kind of wonder, seeing Eli walking away, somebody that he played with, obviously had kind of a fun tweet for him. He was one of the first to throw up something about Kobe Bryant. You just got to wonder, waiting to see if Josh McDaniels was going to go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. There's an opening, obviously, for him to be potentially for the Chargers. People have talked about the Raiders. You just have to wonder if he's not starting to think about, what do I really need to prove, and is this really what I want to do? I mean, he could be trolling. You could read anything into that picture. I think it's too early to say, but I think, there's been a lot of talk that Drew Brees is heavily leaning toward retiring.
Yeah.
It could be a real turnover, changing of the guard here in the NFL, seeing some people. I wouldn't rule out I think he's probably looking at it a little bit differently now than he was a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
But we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I agree with you. So you can't really tell, but I was looking on his Instagram, and a lot of Patriots players, with the way that they're commenting, does seem like it's more of like he's leaving. And I would not be surprised either with everything you were just talking about, which is going to make things very interesting as well, because we've been talking about this for a couple weeks now, how loaded this free agency market could be for quarterbacks. And now you've got Brees might be leaving, and I still don't believe in the Taysom Hill thing, but we'll see what happens. Phillip Rivers might be done.
Well, I think Brees is either going to retire or go back to the Saints. I really don't see him going to another team.
Oh, no. Yeah, I don't think he's going to another team, but I think I'm with you. I think there's a better chance that he retires. I don't want to read too much into the Pro Bowl thing, but with Russell Wilson kind of giving up his spot to allow Brees, and you've seen, if you really go back and look at Brees the past couple years, he's been very adamant about, I'm going to come back and play. It was never, I'm going to take my time and kind of weigh it was always, no, I'm going to be back next year. This is the first time I've really kind of seen him be like, I'm going to give it a month, see where, and I think, a lot of times you see these NFL players, when they talk about it, when you're thinking about retirement, you're already done. And so I think maybe that's where Brees is at. And so if he might be gone, you got Brady. We saw Eli's already tired. It could be huge. So I've kind of zoomed in on the picture, and it does look like he's walking back toward the field. But again, you've got all kinds of players in his comments, and the way that they're talking about it, it does seem like he might be done. So that'll be interesting. I'd imagine we're not going to hear anything. So I think it's more of a him kind of messing with us kind of thing. I mean, he is definitely this year seeming to be more willing to kind of speak out a little bit more and more social media present. So interested to see where that goes. Obviously some big news breaks. We'll talk about it. I don't imagine he's going to announce retiring or anything during this weekend. I would imagine it's going to come after the Super Bowl. So Anyways, regardless, Matt, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the Super Bowl. We're both hoping, obviously, for a great game, and I look forward to talking to you on Monday to recap what we're both hoping will be a very good Super Bowl.
Yeah, and if nothing else, let's hope halftime gives us something to talk about.
I doubt it.
Prepare for glory! I don't know if you got your popcorn ready. If you got your popcorn ready. I came out the womb, I was ready. And he's hit the end zone for an unbelievable touchdown.
I would be honored if you played football for this team.
Throw it up above his head. They can't jump with me. Golly.
Oh, they tackle him at the 40-yard line. Who can make a play? I can. Who can make a play? I can.
Hey, Kev, the client needs that document ASAP.
I'm trying, but the internet is so slow. And now it isn't working at all.
Is your internet provider holding your business back? Switch to one who keeps you moving forward. At Cox Business, we know how crucial connectivity is to your business. That's why we give you the peace of mind of around-the-clock network monitoring and 24/7 support. So if your provider isn't setting your business up for success, make the switch to Cox Business today. Get 50 megs of internet for only $90 per month with a 1-year agreement. Ends 4/30/20. Restrictions apply. Visit coxbusiness.com for details.
Su música es para siempre. Los Ángeles Azules. Una noche inolvidable. Los Ángeles Azules. Todos somos cumbia. Boletos a la venta en Ticketmaster.com.